Good evening. Good evening. My name is Yesenia Noviton. I'm the director for the Bronx Local National Nurses United. I was born here in the Bronx and raised my children here in the Bronx. I'm also a registered nurse serving our veterans, and most importantly, I am a United States Navy veteran. So now I would like to introduce our speakers and tell you a little bit about what you will hear from them tonight. Our first speaker is Susan Gordon. She's an award-winning journalist and author who writes about healthcare. Her most recent book about VA healthcare is titled Wounds of War: How the VA Delivers Health, Healing, and Hope to the Nation's Veterans. Susan will begin our discussion about how the Mission Act is poised to betray the VA's true mission. Our next speaker is Joanne Rowling, National President of Vietnam Veterans of America. He will speak to what the veteran service organizations were told about the Mission Act and the VVA's determination to hold the administration and Congress accountable to what the veterans were promised. Our post-9/11 veteran leaders, Jeremy Butler and Kristen Rouse, they will speak to the need for a strong and healthy VA for our post-9/11 veterans. These veterans are experiencing health issues related to burn pits, which some call this generation's Agent Orange. Johnny Williams will speak next. He's the CEO of Help Is On The Way. He will speak about how much our veterans love the Bronx VA and that their time spent there together is a lifeline for them. Gene Laureano, he will speak to the unique needs of disabled veterans and the VA's unique ability to care for them. Next, Skip Delano. He's a member of the Save Our VA Action Team and Veterans for Peace. Skip will speak about the needs for veterans to preserve what we've earned, what we deserve, and what we've been promised. Captain Frances Capellan, United States Army. Frances is my union sister and a fellow nurse. Frances will speak of her 40 years of active duty career. And of course, our Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She will listen to her town. She will listen to our town of veterans and nurses and will respond to our town's concerns. I would like to introduce some of our community leaders who are joining us here tonight. Principal Brandon Muccini of PS 83, who has been gracious in welcoming our town to his school. From Congressman Espaillat's office, Jeffrey Tolentino. From Congresswoman Rice's office, Natalie Block-Levin and Kate Ciuccini. From the State Senator Alessandra Biagis' office, Deputy of Chief of Staff Christian Amati. Our District Leader of Assembly District 82 Part B, Marjorie Velasquez. From the New York City Department of Veteran Services, Eric Henry. From the New York City Advisory Board, Joe Bello. And our veteran leaders who are here with us tonight are Peter Del Delvio from the American Legion, and Common Defense Executive Director, Jose Vasquez. And Joseph McManus, Councilman for Vichy Torres. And from the thank you. From the labor movement, we have the New York State Nurses Association, nurses here. Our National Nurses United nurses from the Bronx VA are here too. And as well as the Johns Hopkins nurses who are organizing to become part of our NNU family. So after the speakers, we will begin the town part of our town hall, which will be moderated by the NNU Bronx Associate Director, Ms. Wanda Mayo Robinson, RN. Okay. We will be taking questions from the audience, and some of you already have submitted questions and may be called by name. So, why are we here today? To talk about the Mission Act. So what is the Mission Act? One main component of the Act is that it extends the caregiver stipends to pre-9/11 veterans. This was the right thing to do from the beginning, but it should have been a standalone act. Also, a second component of the Mission Act is that it replaces the Choice Program with a permanent community care program. It was presented as a way to supplement, not supplant VA health care, but funds that are needed to fund, fix, and staff the VA will instead go to these non-VA care programs, thereby weakening our VA healthcare system. The third component of the Mission Act, or one of the main ones, is that it establishes an asset review commission. This was presented as a way to optimize and modernize the VA facilities. However, our concern is that when the asset reviews begin, many of the VA hospitals may be underperforming. And why? Because so much of the money will have gone to the non-VA care. Dollars that could have been used to fill the 49,000 vacancies in our VA system, buy new equipment, and repair our buildings in which we take care of our veterans will have left the VA. If the VA proceeds with this underhanded effort to privatize the VA, our hospitals will be caught in the crosshairs. So, what do we mean by privatization? When our labor rep, Anne-Marie Lunetta, first started talking about this, I'm gonna admit, I asked her, what do you mean? Like Montefiore is gonna come over and buy the building? But Anne-Marie explained, no, it won't look like that. It will be a stealth effort. She said officials will look this in the eye, look veterans in the eye, and say, we're not gonna privatize the VA. But she said the bills that are being introduced in Congress aren't about funding, fixing, and staffing the VA. They're about moving money out of the VA system. I'd like to say here that NNU agrees that there's a time and place for non-VA care, but that isn't how the Mission Act was written. You hear more about it from our speakers today. Because we have many concerns, NNU went into action. We've issued press releases. We've submitted public comments. We've rallied at the VA Central Office. We've visited Congress in DC and here in our own city. We've done gate actions right in front of the VA hospitals. We've encouraged our veterans who love our VA to write letters to their local newspapers. We've done campaign over social media. Legislation is being drafted with input from NNU. Through all of this, we were facing brutal attacks on our union. We are fighting back against those attacks as we're fighting against privatizing the VA with the addition of a lawsuit. And of course, we're hosting town halls. That's why we're here today. This town hall will end with a call to action, which will be led by NNU's Mid-Atlantic Collective Bargaining Director and veteran himself, Corey Lanham. And now, for our first speaker, our award-winning journalist and author, Susan Gordon.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's so good to be in the Bronx with all of you. I'm here as a journalist and author of several books on the VA. I've spent 35 years researching private sector healthcare and 73 years, that's how old I am, being a patient in the private healthcare system. And I will never get, with the best insurance in the world, the kind of care that veterans get in the VA because it doesn't exist in the private sector. But most importantly, I'm here as an ally of VA patients and their families and the 300,000 federal employees who support and care for them. Veterans want the VA to be strengthened. Of the 300,000 people who work in the VA, 100,000 of them actually are veterans. Did you know that? A third of VA employees are veterans. So what a good idea to help veterans by kicking veterans out of a job. I don't think that's a very good policy for a president and administration that supports veterans. I'm not a veteran, And I want the VA to continue existing because the VA helps not only veterans, it helps all of us through its research. It's the biggest research arm in the country. It teaches 70% of our doctors, 40% of our nurses, and other healthcare professionals. The healthcare system in this country would be devastated, the healthcare training system, if we didn't have the VA. The VA is a model of clinical, integrated, coordinated care that we should all enjoy, every single one of us, not just veterans. And if the VA is privatized, that is a defeat not only for veterans but for all of us. The VA is a mission-driven, not profit-driven system, right? The nurses and other caregivers in this system understand all the great innovations you've developed and you deliver to veterans. PTSD treatment, military sexual trauma treatment, palliative care for end of life, geriatric care. There's 7,600 geriatricians in the private sector for 300 million Americans. The VA has more geriatricians and delivers more geriatric care to an aging population, than anywhere else. It practically invented the field. But this system is under attack right now. Why? Why is it under attack? Because it proves that government works. And there are hospital industry executives and Koch brothers funded Concerned Veterans for America billionaires and the Mar-a-Lago crowd, right, which realizes that this is a bad model if you believe that the market does everything right and government does everything wrong, which is false. They want to outsource care in spite of the fact that study after study confirms that there are shorter wait times at the VA than in the private sector, that study after study confirms that VA care is equal or superior to the care in the private sector. Study after study confirms that outcomes are better in the VA, particularly for mental health care and suicide prevention and things like that. And even for women's health. 7% of women are VA patients, yet the system has constructed or is trying to construct a separate women's health system for these patients. If you think the private sector is going to try to do that for 7% of patients, think again. Right now, we are facing a situation in which these right-wing advocates of privatization are trying to divert billions of dollars to private sector health care. Under the Choice Act, they diverted $19 billion to private sector providers, and that, if you read the Government Accountability Office report, was a total disaster. Millions of dollars were spent on private sector insurance company administrators who ripped the government off for millions and millions of dollars. And now they want to take a failed model and make it even bigger and expand it even further. The Secretary Robert Wilkie, in violation of the intent of the Mission Act, and I know you'll hear that from other people here, in violation of the intent of the Mission Act, has set access standards, 30-minute drive time, 60-minute for mental health and primary care, 20-day wait time for mental health and primary care, 60-minute drive time, and 28 days for specialty care that would outsource the care of over between 40 and 60% of the nation's veterans. They say that's not privatization. What do we say? It is privatization, right? They would be outsourced to private practitioners who, no matter how well-intentioned, operate in a fee-for-service world of fragmented care, endless cost shifting, and endless insurance company paper shuffling. And many of these providers have little or no experience taking care of veterans. The RAND Corporation recently did a study of New York State, your state. It surveyed mental health practitioners, primary care docs, nurse practitioners, PTs, physical therapists, etc. They set up 7 criteria to see if these private sector providers were ready, competent, and capable of taking care of veterans. Guess how many percent of these providers met their criteria? 2%. The vast majority reported that they knew nothing about veterans, and of that vast majority, the vaster majority, said they weren't interested in learning about veterans' conditions. Get this, they will take our money, to take care of veterans, but they're not interested in finding out about veteran-specific conditions. And the vets in this room, you guys and women know, right, that your problems are very different than mine, right? You have really serious problems, and if I as a clinician don't know about them, then I'm not going to take care of you. And we're also not going to find out about the new Agent Orange, the new burn pit, the new PSD, the new military sexual trauma. So right here in New York, we have a survey that shows what's coming. Multiply that by 50 states, and you can see the disaster that's in the making. Within a few years, if the VA continues to be understaffed, and if you keep giving money to the private sector, right, there have been some estimates that say it could cost almost $179 billion a year to pay private sector docs, between $5 and $179 billion. If you keep taking money out of the VA to pay the private sector, the VA is going to collapse. Medical centers like the one in Bronx, Manhattan, Brooklyn, etc., they will not be able to function. The people who work for veterans will be laid off. It's inevitable. And eligibility benefits will be restricted if it costs too much. In the new budget submitted by the administration, it states that the VA needs a minimum of $50 billion to do needed infrastructure repairs. The budget allocates $1.5 billion. $50 billion, they get $1.5 billion. In the name of providing veterans with healthcare choices, and that's what they're saying. They're saying this is about healthcare choices. They are giving veterans, you people in this audience, and millions of veterans around the country, the choice. They are giving you a choice. And here's what the choice is. Getting lower quality care with longer wait times in the private sector. Recent reports from VA leadership, these are the privatizers themselves, say that even the best private sector doctors with the best outcomes may not deliver high quality care to veterans. Why? Because you're tougher to treat. The average 65-year-old has 3 presenting problems. Me, right? I'm 73. I have maybe 5. The average Vietnam veteran has 9 to 12, right? PTSD, MST, Agent Orange-related diabetes, prostate cancer, etc., homelessness, and so forth. This report said that veterans would be harmed. It said veterans would be harmed by failures of coordination and care in the private sector. Last week, in the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee hearing, Johnny Isakson, the chair, the Republican chair from Georgia, said in the conclusion, we will get things wrong. We will stumble before we walk. I have a message, and we need to deliver this message to Senator Isakson. In healthcare, you don't stumble before you walk, right? You run. You walk, you run, and then you launch. You don't get it wrong, and then you launch, because people will die. The bad news is, if we don't stop it, people will die. The good news is we still have time to stop it. We have time to stop Republicans and some of the Democrats from getting away with a betrayal of veterans and dismantling a healthcare system that benefits us all. How do we stop them? The same way activists in this congressional district replaced a longtime incumbent who voted for VA privatization with a now nationally known champion of Medicare for all. You're here because we're trying to launch a grassroots effort to mobilize veterans, their caregivers, members of VA unions like the National Nurses Union, AFGE, NEFI, other labor groups, and healthcare reform groups to oppose privatization. The people on this panel tonight, the people in this room, patients of the VA, veterans, all of us, we have to mobilize a grassroots national movement to fight this. We also have to hold Democratic presidential candidates accountable on this issue because among those candidates, only Bernie Sanders voted against the Mission Act. And we have to remember as we leave here that an injury to one is an injury to all. If veterans lose the best national and only national health care system we have, we all lose, and we cannot afford that. Thank you.
Now for our next speaker, John Rowan.
This is an interesting time with this whole Choice Mission Act issue. What basically started as an overreaction to basically a poor administrator in the Phoenix VA has tried to damage the whole VA system, which makes no sense. And it's also feeding a myth. And the myth is that the private sector can assume the role of taking care of veterans. The one thing about the VA, it takes care of the whole person. Physical health, mental health, all combined, often in association with each other. And the care, by and large, is excellent. When I had my aortic valve replacement, I went to Manhattan, VA. The surgeon who did the job was the chief thoracic surgeon at NYU Medical Center. And he brought over his entire team to do the job. And 3 weeks after my surgery, I was down in Washington testifying before the House and Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, their joint annual hearings, because they did such a great job. I was also lucky and I didn't have any other issues other than a valve replacement. Don't ask me how, but I didn't have any blockages. I don't understand it. Most Vietnam vets I know have had 23 stents already by my age. But the bottom line is this. Omar Bradley, when he came in and revitalized the VA back in the 50s, set up that standard of getting us involved with the medical schools to provide the care that we deserve. And they've been doing it ever since. And because some administrator failed their job in Phoenix, the whole house fell apart, which made no sense. The real bottom line, however, is that the private sector cannot assume care for all the veterans. They don't know who we are. They don't know what we do. They don't know why we're there. They don't understand that exposures, for example, has done more damage than any of the enemies we faced. We lost 58,000 troops in Vietnam, thank you to the war. We've lost hundreds of thousands of Vietnam veterans now over the last 20 years to Agent Orange, if not more. We have no clue, by the way. I keep asking the VA to give me stats of how many Vietnam-era veterans who stepped foot in Vietnam are still alive. They won't give me it. They won't tell me. But I know from dealing with my private sector, I haven't seen a doctor in my private sector healthcare in 3 years. Now, I love the nurses. They're very good, and I like the nurse practitioner. She's a nice lady that I get to see, but she's not an MD when I really need an MD. End up referring you. My wife is here with me tonight. Tried to get an appointment to see an orthopedics surgeon to get her checked on her knee back in March. They said, well, you could have an appointment in July. So if the private sector had choice, she'd be going to some other sector. I have no idea what. Makes no sense. And in New York City here, there's nobody who's not within 20 miles of a VA hospital. Nobody. Yet they want to try to get us to go to the private sector as well. But I know what it's like out there in rural America. Go to upstate New York. You are definitely 20 miles or more away from a VA hospital. You're also definitely more than 20 miles away from most doctors. Go talk to somebody who lives in Montana and ask them what kind of health care they got. I have chapters of VBA in Montana, and I know what they face. And yeah, they do have a long problem and often have to be medevac somewhere to get some real care if it's an emergency. So this idea, this myth that the private sector is going to take care of you as a veteran is ridiculous. Because what we don't understand is, again, the veterans are a sicker group of people than the private sector folks. Because of exposures in Vietnam to Agent Orange, exposures to everything under the sun in the Persian Gulf, exposures to burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan, exposures to polluted water in the United States bases. Camp Lejeune was just the tip of the iceberg. There's 149 air bases in the United States who are toxic Superfund sites. Many of them are starting to pollute, by the way, the water in the private sectors in the towns and villages near where they are. So don't let them fool you. This is strictly an idea to get more money into the coffers of the private sector healthcare folks. And we've got to stop that immediately, push back as much as we can, tell people to stay in the VA, tell our veterans to keep going to the VA. It took them a little while, but they're finally starting to wake up to the women veterans. You're not going to get treated outside. They won't even know you're a veteran. They're not going to ask. So we will hopefully get into some questions later, but I thank you all for coming out tonight, and I thank you for supporting our veterans, and I hope, thank you.
Next speakers, post 9/11 veteran leaders Jeremy Butler.
As mentioned, my name is Jeremy Butler. I'm the CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. We're a post 9/11 veterans organization that was formed in 2004. Our mission is to connect, unite, and empower post 9/11 veterans. But our organization, the things that we focus on really cross generations. I'm going to touch on them a little bit. John touched on a couple of them. But we do sort of three primary things. We try and continue the sense of camaraderie that military members always talk about being such an important part of their service. When they come back home, when they go back to their hometowns and transition out of military service, a lot of times what we hear is that what they're missing is that camaraderie that they felt when they were in service, that sense of purpose. So we try and help them connect with each other and rebuild that sense of camaraderie. Secondly, we provide direct services to our members. We've got master's level social workers that work not only with our members, but any veteran family members to connect them to services that they need to survive and thrive. Lastly, and what we're often most known for, is our advocacy work. We work in Washington, D.C. and in state capitals around the country to push for legislation and policies that are going to support veterans and their family members. We do an annual survey of our membership. This last survey that we did just last year had over 4,600 respondents, and that helps drive the things that we focus on. We hear from our members, and what they tell us is what we focus on. We have about 12 policy agenda items that are in our annual policy agenda that we focus on, but then we take the top of those, we call them the big six, and those are what we really focus on. Not surprisingly, number one is the suicide epidemic that's sweeping this country, veteran and military suicide. Most of you heard that 20 veterans a day take their lives by suicide. Dig a little bit deeper. 14 of those members are outside of the VA. They don't have connection to the VA. A little deeper, 3 of those are guardsmen and reservists who have never federally deployed, and so they don't have access to the service. So suicide is a big issue that we're focusing on. John mentioned burn pits. A lot of people have not heard of these. It's not too complicated. The description's really there in the name. In Afghanistan and Iraq and other hot spots around the world, service members, they basically take all the trash that they've developed, throw it in a big pit, douse it with jet fuel, and they burn it. That's everything from human waste, medical waste, spent ammunition, plastics, toxics. All of these things just get thrown into a pit and burned. Not surprisingly, the fumes from these have deleterious effects on those service members that can spend months, if not years, on these bases. And we're finding that when they come home, they're coming down with illnesses that are rare, that were really unexpected from such healthy people. We're also focusing on women veterans, underserved population of our demographic. One of our focuses on changing the motto of the VA, for he who has borne the battle. The largest contingent of, or the biggest increasing segment of our society, of our veterans population, are women veterans, and we want to make sure that the VA is there to work with them. We're ensuring the GI Bill is going to remain a substantial and a useful focus and an opportunity for veterans when they come home. We want to make sure that cannabis is a medically available treatment for veterans as an alternative treatment. That one always gets applause. Thank you. And last but not least, and really what ties us all together here, is we're focusing on ensuring that there's reform and oversight of the VA. Almost everything that we do is going to be affected by the Mission Act. So a priority of IAVA is to track and make sure that the Mission Act is implemented in an effective manner that is ultimately primarily focused on ensuring proper and better treatment for the veteran. Not cost savings for the VA, not outsourcing anything, but ensuring that the veteran gets the best, most advantageous and the fastest treatment that they can get. There's a lot we don't know about the Mission Act. It's being slowly implemented. June 6th, not surprisingly, the anniversary of D-Day is the day that it's really being rolled out. So that's upcoming. We've been listening to testimony from the VA recently. My time's up. I'm getting the sign over here. We've been hearing the testimony. There's a lot that's unknown that the VA doesn't even know about how this is going to be rolled out. So one of our primary focuses going forward is going to be making sure that we understand as an organization what the Mission Act is doing, how it's going to be affected, that we're translating that and spreading the word about it, and that we're making sure that ultimately we're supporting and operating as watchdogs to make sure that this gets rolled out in the most effective way. It's a complicated issue. It's a complicated act. There's a lot to it. I'm excited to be here. Really looking forward to your questions. I hope you have some good questions that we can help answer to help you understand everything that's going into this Mission Act and how it could possibly affect veterans. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Our next speaker is post 9/11 veteran leader, Kristen Rouse.
Good evening. My name is Kristen Rouse. I'm a 24-year veteran of the United States Army, Army National Guard, and Army Reserve. My service has included 3 deployments to Afghanistan. I am currently the founding director of the New York City Veterans Alliance, a member-driven policy advocacy and community-building organization that advances veterans and their family members as civic leaders. Veterans are entitled to the best health care that America can offer. We deserve health care delivered by providers and systems that understand the unique needs of those who've served our nation in wartime and in peacetime years, and the unique conditions related to our service, like toxic exposures like Agent Orange and burn pits, the physical, mental, and emotional injuries of our wounded warriors, and the adverse impacts on the men and women who've experienced sexual assault in our military ranks. We deserve world-class health care from the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, and we deserve persistent, long-range oversight, responsiveness, and vigilance from our members of Congress, who serve effectively as the board of directors for VA health care. Our elected officials are responsible for ensuring that the system works for veterans and that it is continuously improving. We can take heart that veterans in New York City overwhelmingly express a high degree of satisfaction with our VA hospitals. In a recent survey that my organization conducted about VA healthcare, 93% of respondents told us that the care that they receive at the Brooklyn VA was either excellent or good. 89% of respondents told us that their care at the Bronx VA was either excellent or good. 69% of respondents told us that the care they receive at the Manhattan VA was either excellent or good. We need to support what's working for veterans, especially the healthcare providers we rely on and the unions who advocate for them. But we must also keep a close watch on what needs to work better. In the same survey where veterans rated our New York City VA hospitals highly, we saw gaps in care and areas for improvement. Women veterans expressed dissatisfaction at twice the rate of male veterans. Women veterans were also twice as likely to say that they felt they were not recognized as a veteran. We've also received strong feedback from veterans who received confusing or conflicting information about being authorized for care from private providers, even having problems in getting the VA to pay the providers or to reimburse the veteran for expenses they thought would be covered. In Brooklyn, we've had to rally veterans to oppose closures and reductions caused by staffing shortages and shifting budget priorities. This is before the VA Mission Act is even going into effect. So as we face the June implementation of the VA Mission Act, as we see a massive expansion of veterans eligible to seek care from private providers, as we anticipate reviews of VA facilities nationwide for utilization and possible closure, we must learn from recent experiences, we must listen to the feedback of veterans, and we need to be listening to what our federal agencies, like the U.S. Digital Service, the GAO, and other federal offices, what our VSOs are telling us, and also what VA leaders themselves are telling us about whether the VA is ready to implement the Mission Act in June. We call on our members of Congress to ensure that the VA rolls out new eligibility criteria for veterans to receive private care only when it can show that its digital technology can support the demand, and only when we can ensure veterans have the support needed to understand what is and isn't paid for or reimbursed, so no veteran ends up stuck with unpaid health care bills. The Mission Act should be implemented only when we can ensure proper guidelines and oversight are in place to protect veterans from bad actors, like the bad actors we've seen with educational benefits, to ensure that veterans are not misled, that they don't receive below standard health care, and that bad actors are not reaping federal tax dollars by taking advantage of veterans. The VA Mission Act should be implemented only when we can ensure that our VA hospitals are already fully staffed and fully open to meet the unique healthcare needs of our veterans with high quality care. We must not face situations like we've had in recent years in Brooklyn and other places where veterans who fought for our nation, some of them more than 50 years ago, they must not have to fight to keep VA healthcare open, available, and functioning as intended. Our leaders in Congress must stand up for us and be fully engaged and involved in VA healthcare. But just as democracy requires that all of us get involved and do our part, veterans also need to step up and be part of the solution if we can. If you're a veteran and you're seeking health care and you have issues with your VA health care, let your elected officials know. Let them hear from you. Give them the opportunity to make things right for you and also on the floors of the United States Capitol. And if you're a veteran who is not currently enrolled in VA health care, get enrolled. Be counted. Be counted as a veteran who utilizes VA facilities and needs them to stay open for business and fully staffed. If you can, get active in your own health care. And I'm speaking primarily to younger veterans who have yet to enroll and get involved in VA health care. But when you are able to, if you are able to, advocate for your own health care at the VA, because when you advocate for your health care, you are advocating for the veterans who are going to follow you. Thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Johnny Williams, CEO of Help Is On The Way. Sorry. Johnny is here first.
My name is Johnny H. Williams, Jr. Everything that people are telling you, you've got to learn to listen. I'm going to tell you the other side, and I'm going to make it quick too. I use myself as an example. I've had 4 heart attacks already and 5 strokes. So what? Get the hell out of that house and keep it moving. Right or wrong? The nurses that care for us, even they go through hell. Understand what I'm saying? We have to care for each other in every way, shape, or form. I'm a Vietnam vet. I told you about the sickness already. Okay, let's get past that, all right? No, you can't. I'm a Vietnam vet. I was in the water. It went inside of me. Last year, I was 11 months pregnant. Am I right, Chris? And what happened? They cut me open and they pulled out the black snake, we call it. Again, people do not pay attention to all the problems that us veterans go through, except for the ones that are there to save us. It's a big difference when you're laying in a bed and the nurse is next to you and they're smiling and they're caring for you. This is how we survive. I don't care, Iraq, Vietnam, Korea, wherever you have been, the nurses are always there for all and each and every one of us. You cannot forget that. You may think that it stops there. Privatizing, be careful. Why do I say that? My wife had a breakdown. She ended up in the VA hospital, and they took care of my wife. I can't believe how they took care of my wife. This is a family-oriented family that how we come together, we work together. When you first start, it's not going to stop to the end. You must learn to think with your mind and feel with your heart. Veterans go through so many changes. How many changes do we go through? Well, I do remember I have a 3rd wife right now. And she's Dominican and she beats me up every day of the week and I love it. Some veterans have 6 and 7 wives. And you, the audience, will say, why would they have so many wives? Who in the heck's going to stay in the bed with a man that's screaming all night long? This is called post-traumatic stress disorder. The hell I went through, if it wasn't for the people that are here, including my veterans, it doesn't make a difference where they have been and what war they have been in. They say, good morning, how are you? They make me feel so good. I get out of my house and I come to the VA hospital. The best one, to my opinion, is in the Bronx VA. And just in case you don't know, we have our own website. We don't have to have somebody build a website for us. It's called Help Is On The Way, forveterans.net. We are the only ones in America. What, you need a new house? Well, you need a new car? What, you need a lawyer? I don't care what it is that veteran needs, that veteran gets on the spot. Go to the website. We are here to take away all the junk that we go through by us coming together as one. Nobody's going to tell you the problem that they're having at home if they can't trust you enough to talk to you. We in the lobby and oh my gosh, everybody is laughing and jumping and having great times together. You understand what I'm saying? One of the problems we have is our parking. We're going to have a 3-4-story parking lot soon. So when you hear people complaining about A, B, C, D, E, F, G, smile at them and say, help is on the way.
Thank you. Now for Skip Delano. He's Executive Board for Veterans for Peace and Save Our VA.
Actually, let me just start by thanking NNU, but also in particular Anne-Marie Lunette, who is the organizer for NNU here in New York City. This would not happen without her hard work to make it happen. So thank you so much for having us all here tonight. So if VA healthcare is such a great, highly rated, world-class system who makes veterans like me happy that we have it, why would anyone want to privatize it? Privatization, let's just be clear, it's not just a fancy way of saying we're going to take tax dollars out of the VA and put it in the pockets of millionaires and billionaires. That's privatization. Privatizing VA healthcare would be a big boon to individual doctors, the big hospital systems in the private sector, more patients, more profits, which is why many of them support privatization of VA healthcare. Privatization is also favored by large pharmaceutical companies who have always opposed the VA's ability, as us vets all know, unlike Medicare, to negotiate lower prices for pharmaceuticals through the drug formularies. All of us get very cheap drugs at the VA. Then who else opposes the Republican Party? It's no secret that for many years, Republicans have attacked almost all taxpayer-supported government services, whether schools, housing, or health care. The Republicans' anti-government ideology argues that most government services should be privatized. Privatized provided not by the government, but for-profit private companies. Privatize public schools, privatize public housing, privatize VA healthcare. Their arguments against VA healthcare are part of a larger war on all publicly funded healthcare in America. Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare. Republicans and other opponents of the VA have long argued that the entire VA healthcare system should be privatized. But there's a special group I'd like to highlight here tonight. It's a group of VA critics funded by the far-right Koch brothers. People have mentioned them already. Texas oil billionaires, two of the richest people in the world. Their agenda is big. Dismantle any and all government programs, many of which take care of our elderly, the poor, our children, even us veterans, all with the goal of rewarding the richest of the rich, like the Koch brothers and their corporations, and Wall Street. One of the groups the Koch brothers fund to advance their radical right-wing agenda is called Concerned Veterans of America. I think Suzanne mentioned them earlier. It is not a membership organization like the American Legion, VFW, or VBA. Instead, it's a small group of veterans, all with deep roots in the Republican Party, who are paid to staff and act as organizers and lobbyists for their organization. The Koch brothers provide their group with millions and millions of dollars in funding to speak and act on their behalf. Concerned Veterans of America, let me call it CVA, rose to prominence following, John mentioned it, the 2014 VA scandal in Phoenix, where doctors manipulated wait times, and that was a problem at several hospitals. But as he mentioned, it's been corrected. The VA is now easier to get unemployment than in the private sector. But in 2014, CVA used this problem as an opportunity to attack the whole healthcare system as a broken system. They falsely charged that all VA hospitals and clinics had long wait times, were dysfunctional, providing veterans substandard medical services. CVA said we needed to modernize VA healthcare, give veterans a choice, encourage them to abandon the VA, let them find their own doctors in the private sector. There was no CVA argument that veterans would get better care in the private sector, nor did CVA argue that private sector care would be cheaper than VA healthcare. They didn't argue that because VA healthcare is better than private sector healthcare and is cheaper. CVA's lobbying and media campaign was very successful. They convinced Congress to pass the Choice Act, with others have described. It created the first big opening for privatization of VA healthcare by allowing 2 million veterans to go to the private sector. CVA's campaign of spreading negative stories about VA healthcare continued for the next 4 years. They had many supporters in the media, including Fox News. In fact, in 2014, CVA CEO Pete Hegseth took a position as a commentator on Fox News, where he could broadcast damaging news about the VA. Any problem at any VA hospital was reported by Fox News, and often the American media follows their example. CVA has also spent millions of dollars lobbying Congress in their message for all hospitals were broken and should be privatized. And again, there's a lot more you could talk about, and I'd like to do that, but we're out of time, I think. But I'd say that Trump is appointed at the top of his government and at the top of the VA, CVA officials who are leading the effort there to bring about privatizing the VA. Now, who else is kind of for? You didn't hear anybody else here advocating for privatization of VA healthcare. Instead, CVA, Concerned Veterans of America, stands alone. No major veterans organization in America favor VA privatization. And I think that says really where I can stop. Again, it's just Concerned Veterans of America. The rest of us want to have a healthcare system that takes care of us and provides a model for America, how all Americans can have healthcare that takes care of them, just like the VA. And we want to see everything we can to stop privatization of VA. Thank you.
Thank you, Skip.